You step into your child's classroom, and there, above the whiteboard, blaze the 10 Commandments in stone tablet form. God's own law, now mandated by civic decree. But whose freedom does this ignite, and whose conscience does it crush? I'm Veritas Vox, and today we pry open the blistering debate over posting sacred precepts in public schools. Are we restoring moral clarity or erecting a theocratic billboard that blurs church and state into a single behemoth? Stay with me as we confront the incendiary clash of divine mandate and constitutional promise. The 10 Commandments began etched in Hebrew on Sinai's rocks, intended for a covenant people under divine sovereignty. Fast forward 3 millennia. American legislators in Texas, Alabama, and Kentucky vote to emblazon those same words on classroom walls, arguing that Moses' moral code forms the bedrock of Western jurisprudence. Proponents proclaim historical precedents, Magna Carta, English common law, the founders' self-evident truths, all spring from these tablets. Yet this lineage is far from smooth. Thomas Jefferson warned against religious compulsion, insisting on a wall of separation between church and state. Early public schools taught the Bible for moral instruction, but post-Everson, 1947, and Engel vs. Vitale, 1962, Supreme Court rulings forbade school-sponsored prayer or devotional reading. Now backlit replicas of God's law reintroduce biblical text under a cloak of historical or cultural artifact, an alchemy that eludes easy classification. In 2025, Florida's HB 999 mandates foundational Judeo-Christian principles displays, including the 10 Commandments. Lawsuits surge. ACLU briefs invoke the Establishment Clause, suing districts for coercive endorsement of religion. Defenders counter with display amendments, claiming secular framing, e.g., pairing with Magna Carta and Bill of Rights, immunizes the tablets from constitutional scrutiny. Philosophically, this isn't just legal, it's existential. What does it mean when divine imperatives migrate from sacred parchment into civic poster frames? Do they serve as universal moral signposts, or as latent sermons preaching sola scriptura in math class? The classroom becomes a crucible where state and scripture fuse, inviting questions about authority, autonomy, and the soul's sanctuary. The American experiment rests on a paradox, a republic built on freedom yet haunted by moral absolutes. Now the 10 Commandments and their ancient authority clash head-on with the First Amendment's ban on government-sponsored religion. Everson to Engel. In Everson v. Board of Education, 1947, the court affirmed state aid to parochial bus fares, but struck down school-led prayer, erecting Jefferson's wall of separation. 15 years later, Engel v. Vitale, 1962, banned even non-sectarian prayer in classrooms. These rulings laid the groundwork for challenges to religious displays, yet left open the murky question of passive monuments. Stone v. Graham, 1980. Kentucky's brief poster version of the Commandments was struck down as unconstitutional, pedagogical, and devotional display. The justices warned that context matters less than content. Biblical text on a school wall is a sermon by another name. Van Orden v. Perry, 2005. A 10 Commandments monument on Texas Capitol grounds was upheld under ceremonial deism, deemed part of a broader historical display. The court split 5-4, revealing fissures. Can a sacred text become secular simply by company? Or does proximity to state power charge it with coercive force? Recent state laws. In 2024 to 2025, several display amendments mandate 10 Commandments, alongside secular documents, e.g., Magna Carta, Bill of Rights. Lower courts oscillate. Some see inoculation through plural displays, others see camouflage for a sectarian endorsement. Each ruling fans the flames, pushing the Supreme Court to confront whether multiple frames truly dilute doctrinal power, or merely dress it up in civic drag. Imagine a marketplace of faiths: Muslims, Hindus, secularists, Jews, each student under that mounted tablet. Does Moses's code unite or dominate when the state claims it as universal ethics? Universal or particular? The Ten Commandments begin with a declaration: I am the Lord your God. In pluralistic classrooms, can a specific deity's pronouncements ever serve as neutral moral guidance? Advocates invoke natural law, arguing these injunctions echo shared human instincts, prohibitions on murder, theft, false witness. But the opening verse anchors them in divine authority, raising doubts about their neutrality. Competing. Moral traditions. Other faiths and philosophies offer their own covenants: Buddhist precepts, Islamic Sharia principles, secular human rights charters. When the state elevates one set of divine commands above all others, it tacitly places a theological thumb on the moral scale, risking the erosion of genuine pluralism. Psychology of coercion. A child reading "Remember the Sabbath" in a public school may feel religiously compelled, caught between conscience and civics. Even if no teacher enforces observance, the presence of sacred text in a civic institution exerts psychological pressure, subtly signaling which moral universe the state privileges. Philosophical paradox. If the state champions divine law to foster civic virtue, does it not acknowledge its own insufficiency? A government that must lean on transcendent commands reveals a crisis of legitimacy, unable to articulate ethics without invoking a higher authority. Yet, in doing so, it blurs the line between public reason and private faith. In this contested terrain, the classroom becomes a stage for the age-old struggle between absolute moral anchors and democratic freedom, forcing us to ask, can a republic of conscience coexist with commandments carved in stone? Long before smartphones and standardized testing, America's classrooms echoed with biblical verses. Moral instruction was once inseparable from public education. Colonial catechisms. In New England's early schools, reading primers were catechisms that combined literacy with Christian doctrine. Children memorized the Lord's Prayer and the Ten Commandments alongside letters and numbers. No clear divide existed between civic and sacred instruction. McGuffey Readers, 1836. These ubiquitous textbooks wove moral tales and Christian-based admonitions into every lesson. A chapter on honesty cited, "Thou shalt not steal," reinforcing religious ethics as the backbone of citizenship. Moral virtue was a communal pillar, taught through scripture-laced stories. Sunday school influence. As public schools expanded, Sunday schools formalized religious teaching on weekends, yet many communities continued Bible readings in daily schools until the late 19th century. The McGuffey model migrated into public curricula, blurring lines of church-state separation by default. Progressive education and secular shift. By the early 20th century, reformers like John Dewey decried religious instruction as exclusionary. The 1920s saw a wave of released time programs, religion classes off campus, which preserved moral teaching while formalizing its separation from public schooling. Mid-century backlash. Post-war America grappled with fears of godless communism, sparking revivals of prayer and scripture readings in schools. until the Supreme Court's Engel decision ended official devotions. Yet the cultural memory of commandments on classroom walls lingered as a symbol of moral bulwark against secular threats. When public walls host sacred texts, they do more than teach. They brandish the state's soul for all to see. Civic piety or public pulpit. Displaying the Ten Commandments alongside secular documents attempts civic holy waterism, sprinkling government walls with divine ink. It signals that the state seeks moral legitimacy from Scripture, projecting piety as policy. Monumental messaging. Just as statues celebrate heroes, tablets of commands sculpt a narrative. This is a community grounded in divine law. The choice of which moral text to erect reveals the state's self-image, an overt confession of where ultimate authority lies. Art, architecture, and allegory. In some districts, ornate stone tablets flank national flags, blending civic and sacred symbols. The aesthetics aren't neutral. They embed theological statements into hallways, turning school corridors into cathedrals of law. Identity formation. As youngsters learn multiplication under stenciled commandments, they internalize that civic order flows from divine decree. The line between citizen and believer blurs. To obey school rules becomes obedience to God's rule. Resistance and rebellion. For those outside the Judeo-Christian fold, atheists, adherents of other faiths, the displays can feel like civic exclusion. The state's symbolic theology risks alienating citizens whose moral compasses spring from different wells. In this alchemy of architecture and authority, the classroom becomes an arena where civic identity and spiritual allegiance entwine, forcing every student to navigate the unspoken hierarchy of law and faith. When a child's gaze meets those stone tablets day after day, something shifts beneath the surface of learning. Authority seeps from text into psyche. Symbolic authority, internalized. Psychological studies show that repeated exposure to authoritative symbols, flags, badges, uniforms, primes obedience and group identity. The Ten Commandments displayed in classrooms function not as passive decoration, but as constant, nonverbal instruction. These rules matter more than your own ideas. Children absorb this subliminal message, anchoring moral worth to divine decree rather than personal conscience or communal dialogue. Identity formation and moral anchoring. Developmental psychology posits that early moral frameworks shape lifelong beliefs. When sacred laws are front and center in formative years, they become default reference points. A student may grow up equating civic behavior, punctuality, honesty, respect, with adherence to Moses' code sidelining alternative ethical sources like empathy-based reasoning or cultural relativism. Cognitive dissonance and moral conflict. In pluralistic classrooms, students from diverse backgrounds face dissonance. A Muslim child instructed by "Thou shalt have no other gods" confronts a direct clash with their own faith's monotheism. The cognitive tension can lead to internal conflict, either rejection of their heritage or disengagement from school authority, undermining both religious identity and academic trust. Authority and autonomy. Pedagogical theory emphasizes fostering critical thinking and autonomy, yet omnipresent religious edicts signal that questioning Moses' laws is off limits. This environment can stunt intellectual curiosity, teaching students that some truths are absolute and beyond scrutiny, potentially hindering the development of independent moral reasoning. Emotional resonance of divine law. Neuroscience reveals that moral emotions, shame, guilt, pride, activate when individuals perceive violation of core values. displaying commandments in schools taps directly into these effective circuits. A child caught lying before those tablets feels not just disciplinary shame, but spiritual guilt, amplifying psychological pressure and linking self-worth to conformity with divine law. Mandating Moses' words in public hallways has ignited fierce local wars. School board meetings overdose on emotion and legal briefs. Alabama's fracture. In Jefferson County, the school board's 2024 vote to mount Ten Commandments plaques triggered mass resignations. One member stormed out, decrying theocracy in sneakers. Parent protests spilled into buses, where some students tore down new plaques under cover of darkness, sparking arrests and outraged editorials. Texas's legal lineup. In a Dallas suburb, a coalition of Muslim and secular families filed suit within days of the district installing tablets. The ensuing trial drew national attention. Testimonies ranged from impassioned faith defense by local pastors to tearful accounts of students feeling second class for refusing to recite verses. Judges wrestled with whether the display's purported historical context outweighed its clear religious messaging. Kentucky's creative compromise. Fayette County attempted a workaround. They paired the commandments with secular wisdom, Confucius, Gandhi, Lincoln quotes, in a wall of wisdom. Yet opposition saw through the veneer. It's like wrapping a sermon in a history lesson, declared one dissenting parent. Community forums devolved into shouting matches as stakeholders accused each other of either cultural erasure or stealth religiosity. Rural revolt versus suburban subtlety. Small towns in Oklahoma embraced the tablets as reclaiming moral backbone, hosting blessing ceremonies with local pastors and sheriff's deputies. Meanwhile, suburban districts in California quietly tabled proposals after PTA petitions cited concerns about inclusivity and legal risk, illustrating that demographics and local culture shape the backlash's intensity. Media's amplification, national cable news and social platforms transformed local fights into culture war theater. Hashtags like Porcus Moses or Madness and Owo Classroom Theocracy trended, fueling donations for both ACLU lawsuits and Christian Heritage Foundation ads. The conflict spilled into church bulletins and town halls alike, revealing that a simple plaque can fracture communities along fault lines of faith, law, and identity. When a republic stakes its moral claim on tablets hewn for a covenant community, it faces a paradox. Invoking authority it no longer believes it possesses. States search for legitimacy. Modern democracies rest on popular sovereignty. We the people craft laws through debate and consent. By elevating the Ten Commandments to civic decor, the state borrows moral capital from a transcendent source, implicitly admitting that secular legislation cannot rest on its own philosophical foundations. This act reveals an existential anxiety. Without divine imprimatur, would civic morals evaporate in the halls of power? The myth of universal morality. Philosophers from Kant to Rawls sought universal principles grounded in reason alone, categorical imperatives, or overlapping consensus, without recourse to divine fiat. The commandments display contradicts this. It asserts that only revealed religion can sustain communal ethics, sidelining the possibility of a public moral discourse rooted in human autonomy and rational dialogue. Authority versus autonomy. Civic education aims to nurture autonomous citizens capable of critical moral reasoning. Yet the uncritical presentation of divine law suppresses autonomy, implying that moral truths are handed down, not reasoned or debated. This clash mirrors Rousseau's tension between the general will and divine will. Can citizens truly own laws they must simply obey because they appeared on stone? Secular sacredness. The transformation of religious tablets into civic monuments creates a new hybrid sacred. Secularism sacralizes Scripture. This civil religion risks hollowing both spheres. Faith becomes an arm of government, and government becomes hostage to faith, undermining the autonomy and integrity of each. The result is neither fully spiritual nor fully democratic. Ethics without theology. Once divine text stands as moral bedrock, any attempt to revise or question it feels like heresy. Educational curricula become less arenas of inquiry and more confessionals. Students must absorb commandments rather than debate them. This militarization of morality, codes posted like orders, shuts down the very deliberative processes that animate civic virtue. America is not alone in wrestling over creed on civic display. Around the world, similar dramas unfold, sometimes illuminated by surprising outcomes. Norway's Christian cross. Norwegian schools historically opened the day with Bible readings. Yet in 2009, the Supreme Court of Norway ruled that crucifixes in classrooms violated the Constitution's religious neutrality clause. The crucifix became a flashpoint, reminding the nation that historical identity cannot trump individual conscience in public spaces. India's temple and government. In 2023, a municipal council in Tamil Nadu attempted to reconstruct a Hindu temple adjacent to a public school. Secular activists brought suit under constitutional provisions against state endorsement of religion. The High Court struck down the plan, emphasizing the necessity of a strictly secular educational environment in a multi-faith democracy. France's secularism, laïcité. France's laïcité enforces a strict ban on religious symbols in public schools. Headscarves, crucifixes, and yarmulkes are prohibited to preserve neutrality. While controversial, this approach prevents any scriptural display, but also ignites debates over religious freedom and cultural assimilation. Israel's Jewish code exhibits. Some Israeli schools display portions of the Ten Commandments in Hebrew alongside state symbols, framing them as cultural heritage. Yet Arab Israeli citizens contest this as privileging Jewish narratives, leading courts to demand that displays include the basic laws of Israel to reflect civic plurality. Canada's charter art. In Canadian classrooms, provincial legislatures have debated posting the Charter of Rights and Freedoms alongside Indigenous treaties to acknowledge historical injustices. Here the debate shifts. Which texts deserve monument status, and must religious heritage yield to the moral imperatives of reconciliation? These global snapshots illuminate that no one solution avoids conflict. Whether sacralizing scriptures or purging religious symbols, public institutions grapple with balancing historical identity, moral education, and pluralistic inclusion. Each society's approach reveals its unique priorities and blind spots about the source and scope of moral authority. In this modern drama, lobbyists, judges, school boards, and grassroots warriors each play a scripted role. Yet, the script is never fixed. Lobbyists of the tablets. Organizations like the Christian Heritage Foundation and the Freedom from Religious Gift Shops, PAC deploy slick campaigns, billboards of Moses, glossy brochures, persuasive op-eds, framing the commandments as patriotic heritage. They bankroll friendly candidates and flood public comment periods with pre-written letters, ensuring political momentum swings toward display mandates. Judicial ringmasters, federal and state judges juggle precedent and principle, under the glare of media scrutiny. Some wear robes like patterned armor, wielding the establishment clause to strike down displays. Others adopt ceremonial deism stances, carving out ever narrower loopholes that preserve marble tablets under secular pretexts. Each opinion becomes a riptide, shaping the debate's next act. School boards as staging grounds. Local boards become gladiatorial arenas. Candidates campaign on defend our morals platforms. Meetings erupt into shouting matches, with prayer warriors and freedom fighters each claiming divine or constitutional sanction. The simple vote to hang or remove a plaque transforms into existential litmus test. Do we serve God, the state, or neither? Grassroots foot soldiers. Parents and students form ad hoc coalitions. Commandments for kids versus books, not Bibles. Organizing petitions, teach-ins, and viral TikToks. Their skirmishes, live-streamed for national audiences, turning neighborhood high schools into front lines in a culture war that echoes through every dinner table and social media feed. When the state seizes sacred symbols, communities devise counter-rituals, art, dialogue, and protest become the new sacraments of dissent. Art is exodus. In districts where tablets go up, students paint murals beneath them. Images of Socrates teaching, Gandhi spinning his wheel, or mother and child holding a globe. Visual prayers to pluralism. These clandestine frescoes turn hallways into catacombs of resistance, where dissent lives in color. Dialogical liturgy. Interfaith coalitions organize Circle of Consciences events in school gyms, Jews, Muslims, humanists, Christians reading from their moral texts in rotation. This ritual of shared voices transforms the space into a living wall of wisdom, challenging the monopoly of any single tablet. Protest, pilgrimages. On installation days, parents and students stage silent processions, carrying blank placards through school entrances. Their quiet presence, like a procession of ghosts, reminds authorities that absence can speak as loudly as inscription. Guerrilla scripture. In some towns, dissenters slip laminated copies of the Humanist Manifesto or passages from the Quran into textbook racks beneath the tablets. These subversive inserts blur the classroom's message. For every commandment on high, there's another moral voice waiting in the shelves. Digital psalms. Hashtags like Jacquerie Erase to embrace trend. When local tech-savvy teens project scrolling messages, no one got over all, onto school walls at night. Their ephemeral light shows turn the building into a canvas of pluralistic psalms, challenging the permanence of stone. When public power co-opts the sacred fights back through brushstrokes, echoes of other faiths, and quiet processions that reclaim the classroom as a space for all spirits. When stone tablets appear in corridors of learning, they do more than hang on walls. They script new visions of who we are and who we ought to become. Recasting the citizen. The Ten Commandments, once covenantal law for ancient Israel, becomes civic catechism. A student's moral imagination is shaped not by critical dialogue or pluralistic deliberation, but by memorizing immutable edicts. The result is a citizenry primed to see law as divine decree rather than human construct, subverting the very notion of democratic self-governance, sanctifying the ordinary. Hallways turn into shrines. Classroom punishments echo "thou shalt not," rather than restorative practices. The moral life shifts from shared responsibility to fear of divine sanction, weaving a cultural tapestry where mercy and nuance struggle to find room alongside literal observance. Narratives of obligation. Public narratives evolve. Journalists describe moral decay, remedied by mounting granite tablets. Politicians boast of returning to God's law as a cure for social ills. This story of national renewal through biblical inscription reshapes collective dreams, inviting a theocratic fantasy that claims moral clarity but risks trampling conscience. Erasing alternatives. As the tablet's shadow grows, other moral visions fade. Humanist principles, indigenous wisdom, secular ethics recede from view, starved of the symbolic space once shared. The Commonwealth's moral library is reduced to a single volume, narrowing the civic imagination to the commands of one tradition. We stand at the crossroads of thunderous law and whispering grace. In these classrooms, the line between state and scripture blurs, and with it, the pulsing question: where does true authority dwell? Witness to tension. Every day, students live among relics of divine law and textbooks of secular knowledge. This collision zone becomes their moral forge. Will they inherit blind obedience, or learn to wrestle with the sacred and the civic? The echo of choice. Even where commandments dominate walls, the human spirit persists in asking why. Those questions echo like footsteps in a marble hall, reminding us that no tablet can silence the restless search for meaning. Grace amid mandates, the gospel's scandal is that grace always exceeds law. Christ stood both under Moses' code and beyond it. When schools elevate tablets, they risk forgetting that the true moral revolution begins in hearts freed, not walls mounted. The silent rebellion. In whispered prayers, spontaneous acts of kindness, and quiet moral reckonings, students resist being mere rule followers. Their souls sketch alternative commandments. Feed the hungry, welcome the stranger, speak truth with compassion. A call to clarity. If state walls claim divine sanction, let every believer carry gospel tablets, not in stone, but in flesh, living out mercy, justice, and humility. The real classroom of freedom remains the heart, where law and love must find their truest balance. The folly of mounting commandments in marble lies in its illusion of moral security. True formation demands more than static inscriptions. Embodied discernment. Over display. No plaque can opine on nuance. Only living communities wrestling with gray can cultivate wisdom. Moral maturity emerges in dialogue, not declaration. Teaching conscience, not coercion. Students must learn to question why this law, rather than obey because it's on the wall. Authentic ethics grow from internal conviction, not external edicts. Sacred debate is ritual. Replace rote reading with Socratic circles, where commandments ignite questions, not quiet conformity. Let the classroom itself become a sanctuary of inquiry. Integration of law and love. Moses' tablets pointed toward covenant fidelity. Christ's teachings pointed toward sacrificial love. True moral compass requires both. Law's clarity and love's flexibility. A living covenant. Stone cracks. Posters fade. But when communities commit to a covenant of mutual respect and compassionate justice, they embody the spirit of the commandments far beyond any classroom display. The most vital inscriptions won't hang on walls but echo in the choices of tomorrow's citizens. Curriculum of character. Imagine lessons where students draft their own classroom covenant, drawing from multiple traditions, discovering shared values without idolizing any single text. Civic pilgrimage. Envision field trips, not to monuments of law, but to community sites of service, food banks, shelters, where moral principles meet human need. Digital dialogues. Integrate online forums where students of varied beliefs debate ethical dilemmas, cultivating respect amid disagreement, mirroring democracy's living debate. Mentorship over mandate. Foster intergenerational mentorship, elder to youth, passing on lived wisdom rather than posted statutes. Unwritten legacy. The next generation's moral landscape will be drawn not in stone, but in stories of compassion, courage, and critical conscience. An unwritten classroom where faith and freedom coalesce. I am Veritas Vox. We've scoured marble, courtroom, and corridor. Now, the true lesson awaits. Will we write the next curriculum on walls, or in hearts attuned to both law's rhythm and love's grace?